If you want to learn the most successful trait of a CISO, then you're not going to want to tune out for this episode because Nick Espinosa with Security Fanatics goes into depth about some of the best things that a CISO can do, but definitely the number one thing that you want to make sure you add to your repertoire when you serve the business and organizations that you operate in. So this conversation will definitely make you think about how you're serving your people, how you're understanding and communicating to the rest of the C-suite in itself, and definitely just learning how to develop your overall thought process and mindset as it pertains to cybersecurity and the business itself. So if you haven't done so already, go ahead down below, hit the like button and the subscribe button so you can stay informed and engage with the community every single time a fire conversation like this comes out. All right, let's jump straight into the intro. What up, what up? Welcome back to another episode of the Simply Secure podcast. I'm your host, Eddie Thomason, and this time we have an incredible guest that you guys are going to get to hear from. He's been in cyber for years, okay? He has a lot of information, a lot of knowledge, a lot of wisdom inside the space, and what I most love about him is that he's always willing to give that knowledge back and help other people really grow and develop inside the space itself. Before I keep on just talking and rambling on, I'm going to let him go ahead and introduce himself and tell you guys what he's most excited about. So go ahead and introduce yourself, my man.
Hey everybody, I'm Nick Espinosa. I'm the Chief Security Fanatic of Security Fanatics. We do all things cybersecurity, cyber warfare, cyber terrorism, infrastructure, and government compliance related, and things I'm excited for outside of like the weekend, which is coming up here. And it's nice. I don't get a lot of time off. I'm actually excited at the state of education right now in cybersecurity. I think we have more people becoming aware of just how bad we're being data mined, just how bad we're insecure. And while we've got a long way to go, I'm glad that people are starting to become aware of this, just given everything we've got going on in society.
Absolutely. And we're definitely going to dive a little bit deeper into that because, we talked a little bit about privacy and what that means, right? But before we start diving way too down the rabbit trail, Nick, give us a quick idea of your origin story, man. As you can tell, huge Marvel fan, right? So give me a little bit of background. What's the origin story? How'd you get into cyber itself?
Well, more Star Trek than Marvel, but hey, Marvel's cool, man. They're all good.
Yeah.
No. So, I shot to Earth from a spacecraft about 40 years ago or so. No. So I got my very first computer, when I was a kid. And I mean, at that point it was game on, just long story short, and so I've been essentially trying to break into things and understand computers, since a pretty early age, breaking into my first major system at age 14, interestingly enough. And then I founded my first company at age 19 and grew that for about 15 years or so after selling it back in 2013 and all that. And then in 2015, we spun up Security Fanatics. And so, here we are. That's kind of the nuts and bolts of it. But I have been an old nerd. And in cybersecurity, I've been the redheaded stepchild in the room for decades at this point, until maybe the last 5 to 7 years when people realize, oh, we actually have to defend these things. Yeah, let's actually start defending these things. And here we are.
That's awesome, man. So I love like always taking the time to kind of find out where people were, because there's a common theme, right? A lot of people, they get started young, 9, somewhere between those years, and they kind of really dovetail into tech in general. And then, like you said, they like, oh man, I got access to all this stuff. I probably should learn how to defend it.
Yeah. Like I wanted to know everything about it. I took, basically when my dad brought that computer home, I was like 5 years old. I took it apart piece by piece, screw by screw. And after he got done whooping me, which was what you did in the 80s, I put it back together again, and it worked. Not that I knew how to, use it, but I could turn it off and on. And at that point, to credit for my father, he's like, there's something here, let him go, and so it's always been with me. And I feel very fortunate. Some of the most interesting people I know still don't know what they want to do when they're like 60 years old. I kind of figured that out very early on, and so here we are, and it's been an interesting journey.
Absolutely. That's such a blessing that you had, somebody that was willing to say, hey, go ahead and run with this, right? Instead of being like, hey, that was wrong, you should never do that again. They just kind of encouraged it and said, go ahead and run.
Well, imagine if he had made the decision, never touch this again. I mean, I'd be, I don't know, Nick the bus driving technological person. I don't know.
Right.
Can't even think. It's been with me for so long. You know what I mean? So here we are.
Yeah, Security Fanatics. I don't know, man. It probably would have been a tough thing to pull that tribe together if you didn't have that early on support, I guess.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, think about it, and our motto is cybersecurity for a fanatical world, and I mean
Hmm.
that's what we're living in. So yeah, you got to be pretty nuts to work with me, I think. No.
Absolutely.
Mhm.
Well, let's start diving into that, Nick,
Yeah.
because I think, when we were talking offline, like I said, I know you have a wealth of knowledge inside of the space itself, and we can go in multiple different directions because of all the things that you do know. But let's spend some time real quick talking about um, just identifying threats, right? And what that looks like inside of the space, and basically some best tips, tricks. Like how do you go about setting up an environment where you can start identifying threats inside of a business or organization?
So I think it's an interesting question, and I'll tell you basically how I approach cybersecurity. So if I'm hired by
Yeah.
a CISO, a Chief Information Security Officer, to consult with them, basically in this manner, usually on the very first meeting, it's like, okay, Nick, let's talk about cybersecurity, and my very first answer is no. We are not going to talk about cybersecurity yet. We are going to talk about
Hmm.
risk. Because if you can't tell me in hard and
Yes.
soft dollars how many computers can be off for how long, for your organization until basically you're out of business, it's so financially unviable, torches and pitchforks at the CEO's door, then how do you know what you're doing right? How do you know your backups are right that will keep you online? Can production be down for 6 hours and it's too long? Can marketing be down for a week and nobody cares? These are things that we have to understand, right? So when you're talking about building a system that is able to detect threat, it has to be based off of the understanding of the risk to your organization and the need you have to protect yourself. And so we can build things, like sandboxes, honeypots, all those kinds of things to see, how the attackers are looking at us, probing, and all those kinds of things. But
Hmm.
we also have to understand to the level, of effectiveness that we need these things as well. And so that really, honestly, just starts with risk. So
Hmm.
in that vein, you've got excellent threat detection systems out there, enterprise level threat detections, but how you leverage those, I think, is unique. I like to say that all of my clients are fingerprints. Every single one of them is unique, even if they're in the same industry, right? Because they might be running different databases, they might have different corporate cultures that directly inform how they educate or don't educate their people. I mean, these are things that we all have to take into consideration. So it's not really an easy answer in that sense, but if you want a technical one, we can talk about that too. But that's typically how we approach this because so many people just think cybersecurity is the products you buy, and it is so much more than that. It really is.
Absolutely. Let's talk about that because I know, when you're consulting with these different companies, right? A lot of, like you said, they get hung up on the technology. Like, what stuff do I have to implement in order to be secure,
Mm-hmm.
right? But there's a lot that has to do with like risk appetite
Mm-hmm.
to understand how much risk a business
Right.
is willing to take before you can start implementing any type of products, right?
Right.
So, how do you typically walk these, maybe the CEO or some of the people that are coming in or coming to you for these types of conversations? How do you walk them through identifying what their risk appetite is so that
Right.
you can get to the part of recommending the right products?
Right, right. So, I mean, so there are some basic formulations and calculations for risk, out there. So, for example, threat times the value of your information plus your vulnerability. Those are things that we can look at. But I like to start actually more on the economic side. Assume for a moment tomorrow everything stopped, everything was down, no technology in your organization could work. You can't email, you can't bill, you can't receive anything, you can't make phone calls because everybody's on voice over IP now. These are things that we have to understand. So how much are you bleeding every single hour? Everybody's getting a free vacation on your dime, as you are down dealing with ransomware or whatever the event is. Those are things we have to understand and then allow us to build in to say, okay, on top of that, what are we protecting here? We're not just protecting the uptime so that you can continue to generate revenue. We are also protecting intellectual property, or we're protecting third-party data. Maybe people outsource their information to you, in that kind of way, like a third-party HR firm, those kinds of things. So understanding that, quantifying that, and then putting a value to that, not to mention calculating the potential reputation damage when you've got to tell the world, I just got everybody's data hit, that's a
Yep.
huge, like, nobody wants to go through that. So
Right.
so that's essentially the basic calculation that we start with. But it really
Mhm.
starts with how many computers can be off for how long, until it's so economically unviable. Your appetite is how much you're willing to go down. And so I've talked to, like, let's say small and mid-sized business, and I have clients from small to Fortune 100 and governments and all that kind of
Yep.
stuff. But on the small to mid-size, you get the CEO, and they're like, no, we can never go down. What are you talking about? And I'm like, yeah, we can absolutely build you, that infrastructure. It'll cost you $1 million. Well,
Mhm.
maybe we can be down for an hour. Maybe we can be down for a
Yeah.
week. Like, don't, you're not throwing darts at a dartboard here. You've got to
Yep.
calculate this, to make an informed decision. And so that's typically where we start with that.
That's awesome. And it's funny because I do want to spend some time on this topic because as you were describing um, the process that you go through, right? I'm
Mhm.
pretty sure, and because you being, I would call you basically an advisor to CISOs, right? You have a good understanding of the industry, and you are able to communicate intelligently on what things that can happen next and things from that perspective. Um, so, with that being said, I know you've had countless conversations with many different CISOs in all different industries and things like that, right?
Mhm.
So, I'm just curious from your perspective, what are some of the traits that you see from the CISOs who adapt well, right? The
Mhm.
CISOs that are actually really, really effective at their jobs, right? Because you can have those, you can have those
Right.
conversations with them, and you can probably find out really soon or really early
Right.
on. I don't know. This might not be a client that I want to take on because he's not either open to suggestions or whatever else it may be. So, kind of share a little bit
Right.
about that. Who are, I guess, the characteristics of your favorite
Right.
CISOs to work with?
Well, I mean, to the last point you just made, depending on who I'm working with, I'm either one, an advisor, their shrink, or a drinking buddy virtually. Just really, some basically want to take my time and complain for a month. And okay,
Yep.
like, I will help you, but here we are.
Yep.
Everybody needs something different. But I would say the
Mhm.
most effective CISOs that I know are the ones that know how to speak beyond the nerd level. And what I mean by that is,
Mhm.
think about the CISO position in the history of the C level of executives. In
Mhm.
oftentimes the CISO is not even considered really a CISO, even though there's a C in the name. Oftentimes they're pigeonholed under the CFO, which is like the worst place you can
Yep.
put those kinds of things because all those people treat nickels like manhole covers. But
Yes.
but
Yes.
those that are actually effective at their job know how to speak at the C level. And when I am talking and advising to CISOs or CIOs or IT directors, even, if it's small to mid-sized companies, like if I'm on stage talking about this, and I'm on stage a lot, I
Yep.
basically say this: understand that your CEO has a vision for the next 3 to 5 years or beyond for that company. The CFO is going to fund it. The CIO is going to build the infrastructure that is the engine for that economy. Whatever you do, whatever product you output, understand technology is what drives that, because you can't communicate, you can't bill, you can't collaborate without that. And so
Mhm.
essentially, you've got that. The CISO is the shield. The CISO runs the team that is the shield for the engine of the economy. And this is true worldwide. I don't care where
Mhm.
you're sitting. If you're in business, you are leveraging technology, which means technology cannot be viewed as some giant money pit where the business is throwing money into. It has to be understood that it's what helps advance the business, and that cybersecurity has to be married to it in order to defend it. And so those CISOs that can actually speak in that language to say, look, I need this firewall and this DNS and this, like, you're going to lose everybody. You're going to lose absolutely everybody in the room. It's the same way when I go to my accountant and she starts talking to me, my eyes glaze over and I'm like, just tell me what I owe the government this year. Like, that's all I want to know
Right.
is what's the damage,
Yep.
and so understand that if you are very technical, and most CISOs come from a technical background because the position is so new, they've risen through the
Mhm.
ranks into management. Oftentimes many of them are learning on the fly, or they're taking on these responsibilities, but they are trying to convey the importance of their job to people that don't understand it. And so
Mhm.
when you get that commonality, when you understand how to speak in business, that is beyond important. And those are the ones that tend to thrive. Those are the ones that tend to basically get the ball across the finish line, because here we are. They can move the ball forward in a way because they're getting the funding, because everybody understands the value that they bring, the value that cybersecurity is.
Absolutely. I want to reference real quick a show from Jarek Beeson. I don't know. Do you know Jarek at all? Have you came
No, not off
across
the
him on
top of my
LinkedIn, things
head.
like that?
No.
Man, so yeah, he's another podcaster, incredible CISO. I think he's over at Capital One at the moment, but
Okay.
he talks a lot about a seat at the table, right? Like,
Right.
having a seat at the table as a CISO.
Right.
And, it's so important to, like you said, be able to articulate what's important to the business, right? And
Right.
what's important to be that's beneficial, that's really going to help that business thrive and accomplish the vision of the CISO, right?
Right.
Over the next 3 to 5 years. And I know we all know that's important, and we know that's a big part, because I think we've hit it a lot as cybersecurity professionals in the field.
Mhm.
But what I want to bring it back to is like how do we bridge that gap between what we know from a technical term to communicating it in a very simple, easy to understand way at
Mhm.
the board table, right? Do you
Right.
have any book recommendations, things like that, or
Uh,
give me some scenarios from your perspective that has helped your clients?
yeah, yeah. So I like to do or advise on what I call nerd to English translation.
Yeah.
That is, that's a I know we were talking about that before, but that that
Yep.
is that is part of it. Understanding the common language, understanding that, one of the things that you need to do, especially as you're rising up in management, from middle management to top
Mhm.
level, is to take actual management courses, is to take business courses, like understand the job of the CEO and the CFO and the CMO and the COO and like any C level, intimately what they do, understand how they
Mhm.
approach their jobs by virtue of the lane that they are in, because that's what their job dictates, and then speak to that. I think that
Right.
is, just so unbelievably important. In terms of book recommendations,
Mhm.
I don't know of one off the top of my head, that would advise on like how to speak business, but there,
Yep.
there are some fantastic books out there, like the Champions of the 21st Century, which I think was absolutely a really interesting book on those companies that were able to corner the market in such a niche way, how they
Mhm.
position themselves. And in that, how do you translate that into your own business or your own growth as a professional in cornering that market? Not basically keeping everything for yourself for job security, but how you
Yep.
can show value to everybody else. I think, those are the kinds of things that, that I would be looking at. And there's other books out there. There's one called, I think it's called How Leaky Is My Bucket, and that talks
Mhm.
actually about the finances of an organization or a corporation. I think that everybody that
Mhm.
at the C level or EVP and higher should be reading those kinds of books, because you start to understand the challenges that a business has, and therefore you start to speak to fixing those issues even as you have to get more money. and
Right.
and
Right.
perpetually cybersecurity usually requires more money because we're continuously innovating, because the jerks in the world are breaking into us, right? And they're figuring out
Yep.
new ways how to get around everything. And now we have to pivot, slam on the brakes, and fix something that we didn't know was an issue before. So
Yep.
so these are things, that are combined. But that's my general approach and my general philosophy.
Absolutely. And you had a great point, because it's another conversation that we had with Andre Walls as well, when it comes to understanding the business, right? Because with
Right.
what's going on, listen, I just wanted to take this really quick break to see if you guys are actually enjoying
Mhm.
the content that's inside of this show. Because if you are,
Right.
it will help out the channel a bunch if you go ahead down below, hit the
Right.
subscribe button, hit the like button if this conversation has truly been fire. But only if it's been fire, though. If it's been some trash, let me know in the comments. Either way, I appreciate the feedback. All right, let's get back into it.
Exactly. Well, and keep it in the football realm. I mean, look at
Mhm.
essentially what is an offensive or defensive line? It's
Yep.
choreography.
Hmm.
Really, think about it in that way. You have a playbook, right? You didn't go in thinking, all right, we're just going to stand in the line and figure this out. You
Yep.
practiced. You had a choreography. You knew where that safety was in relation to you based on this.
Hmm.
And think about it. The other team's choreography is to try and disrupt yours on the offensive side,
Hmm.
and vice versa when you have the ball. And so,
Yep.
so if you understand it in that way, understanding how you have to collaborate, how you have to work together, is essentially how you create a defensive strategy for an
Hmm.
organization. That's essentially what we're talking about. The number one problem we have with organizations and corporations, and isn't necessarily like the choice in firewall or antivirus, and quite frankly there's a lot of crappy choices out there, but the number one choice we have that companies fall down on is not training your people, not making them
Hmm.
aware. Think about it. I talk constantly about creating a global herd immunity for cybersecurity. And thanks to COVID, I never have to explain what herd immunity means anymore because we get it. But we are all interconnected. Think about it.
Mhm.
Social media, internal communications, email, Slack, Teams, Discord, take your pick. And by
Yep.
virtue of that, if we are not aware of the threats out there, we have a problem. Or if we are aware and all of our friends and coworkers are completely clueless and clicking on every damn thing that comes in, guess who's going to get attacked more easily? We are. So we
Yep.
need to build this. This is one
Mhm.
massive global defensive line in football, one massive
Yep.
choreography that we all have to be. We all have to understand this playbook. I mean, it's so
Mhm.
unbelievably important.
Absolutely, and I'm glad you brought that up because this is a frequent topic that we visit on the show, and it's the idea of like how we're bridging the gap between the security teams and the people, right?
Right,
Because I know there's a very popular mindset that your biggest vulnerability is your people, right?
right,
Um, and when from that perspective, playing that side of the role or looking at it from that advocate side, how do you train people so that they
right,
don't resist you, right? In the aspect of like, hey, these tools are in place in order to help you,
right,
compared to just, hey, you're not allowed to do this and I'm slapping you on the wrist,
right,
right? Like, how do you communicate that to the organization so
right.
that your people are more on board and taking action and being a part of that defensive
Right.
line scenario or metaphor we brought up?
So when I'm on stage, I talk a lot about how the nerds in our lives are not off the hook either. Meaning,
Mm,
as we are looking at society in general, most people are clueless, about essentially cybersecurity. In fact, Pew did a research that showed 89% of people, 89, almost 9 out of 10 people, could not pick out what multi-factor authentication was given a screen of 4 different possibilities. Only
wow.
1 in 10 basically picked the right square. That is what
Mm,
we are talking about here. So we have problems society wide, but the nerds in our life, the cybersecurity professionals, the IT professionals are not off the hook. One of the number one things cited why people dread calling their IT is jargon. We don't get it.
mm,
We don't understand how to communicate. That's why
mm,
I talk about things like nerd to English translation, because if we, our community, cannot convey to the other community the importance of this, the awareness of these things, then how are we possibly going to expect them to understand this? This is why we have educational pushes, but this is why the IT industry in and of itself, we need to really stop being snarky jerks, because there's a lot of them
yeah.
out there like, oh my god, you don't know how to do XYZ. Well, no. I also can't wrench on my car. I want it to work and I don't want it to blow up. We
Yep.
specialize, right? I don't do my own root canals. I mean,
Yeah.
like, so we have to understand that at a level. Now,
Yep.
also understand the state of the world today when it comes to technology. Also, according to
Mhm.
Pew, only 38% of people, less than 4 in 10, 38%, think that
Mhm.
technology has personally benefited them in their lives.
Mm.
And think about that for a
Nice.
second. That is massive. That is
Yep.
absolutely huge. 60%. 60%. That is nuts. That just doesn't think technology has benefited them at all.
Yep.
And so,
Mhm.
what does that tell us about society? Society, in and of itself, is myopic. We see the phone in front
Mhm.
of our face and we think, this really hasn't benefited me. Sure, I've got social media, but it's depressing the hell out of me,
Yeah.
and I
Yeah.
and I can't escape work, or I can't escape my schoolyard bully that now follows me home on social media. Technology
Mhm.
hasn't helped me. But what about healthcare tech that makes us live longer, or automotive tech that makes our cars more efficient and safer, or airplane technology that hopefully the planes won't fall out of the sky? These are things that we have all around us. Technology
Yep.
drives society forward. And if we can't
Mhm.
convey that message in clear, plain English or whatever language you speak, we have a very
Mhm.
serious problem on our hands.
Absolutely. I want to take some time and maybe this could be a funny story. This could be I have no idea, right? I'm going off the cuff here, but I want you to tell me about a time, Nick, where maybe you had to communicate a something about technology maybe to somebody who has absolutely no connection. Like when I initially think of this scenario, I'm thinking of like trying to explain to my mom how to use her iPhone. Right? Like,
So
can you
why'd you gotta
describe?
take my
Because I'm trying
example,
to.
man? Why did you have to take my example? Come on.
Well, I
Literally,
didn't
that
give the how. I
literally.
didn't give the how to yet. I didn't give the how to yet. So you could definitely give the how to, because I genuinely want to know this as well.
So so my example is my mother. You know,
Yep.
I love dearly, don't get me wrong, but okay.
Yep.
So my second TED talk was called The 5 Laws of Cybersecurity. That was originally an article I wrote, I think in 2018 for Forbes. And I had my mother in mind because no
Mm-hmm.
matter what you do, you can give her an iPhone, an Android, a technology, a hamster on a wheel, and there's going to be, some kind of disconnect there. And
Yep.
so my goal was essentially writing that for the
Mm-hmm.
world, but for my mom. If she can
Mm-hmm.
understand those concepts, those basic 5 laws that I think we all fall into, then anybody can understand it. And she did.
Mm-hmm.
And that's why I turned it from an article into the talk. But
That's awesome.
but it really behooves us to make sure that we are speaking, I think, a common language. And so
Mm-hmm.
when I'm, let's say, talking with anybody and I'm like, oh yeah, just, you know, like uninstall the app, there's people that don't know how to do that.
Mm-hmm.
And we've seen that where, a person has 500 apps on their phone and they're like, well, I don't use those anymore, but they're still there. So we
Mm-hmm.
have to make sure that we are sympathetic to that. In the same way that if you have a very serious medical condition, you hope your doctor is going to speak plain English to you, that he or she is not going to be like, oh, well, you're an idiot and all of this. But we also hope the doctor's not going to read out of a medical textbook because we're going to be lost.
Exactly.
So there's no easy answer beyond just understanding and putting yourself in somebody else's shoes and then trying to convey that message in that way. So for example, if I'm using, or if I'm, let's say, on stage and I'm talking to the construction industry, like the
Mm-hmm.
plumbers and electricians of the world, I'm going to use examples, from their world. Oh, when you're on a job site, when you're installing the plumbing, which I can't do, or, installing the electrical, which I also really suck at. But
Yep.
you start to bring it into their world. You start to have those commonalities because they start to see themselves of, oh yeah, well, I am on a job site, I am using an iPad to finish this
Mm-hmm.
work order, and yeah, it should be safe because if I can't get the work order in, we can't bill the customer. So these are
Yep.
things that as we are speaking that common language, it really just behooves us to understand the person's situation and where they're at. So when I get, for example, a new client that I'm advising, I learn everything I can about their industry. I really
Mm-hmm.
do. I sit there and read, I'll ask them questions about this because it makes it more common. It also puts me in the mindset of their C-level to say, okay, well, I'm looking at, just keeping it in construction, right? I'm looking at the construction industry as a whole. This is where it's going in the next 5 years. They're automating things, which means they're going to reduce workforces, which means they can potentially thwart a labor shortage, but then you have a union issue. So these are things that we have to navigate. And if you're thinking, well, what does that have to do with security? The answer to that is the people that are running the show that have these problems also have to weigh in security when they're talking about labor shortages and automation and all these kinds of things. And so security has to defend the automation. It also possibly has to defend from disgruntled employees that want to break into the company to do damage because they were fired after 30 years. Because,
Yep.
these are things that are all interrelated. And
Mm-hmm.
so if we can keep it personal, if we can keep it to basically the sphere of what people understand in their own ecosystems, their own specialties or expertise, then we have a much better shot of conveying the message because now what we do relates immediately to them.
Absolutely. So I love that your entire answer there was just completely spot on, right? And it brings me back to this original thought of communication at its purest form is meeting people where they are
Right.
and then helping them get to where you want them to go,
Right.
right? If we can stop talking down on people and being so, like you said, like a jerk, right? Just saying like, oh, what do you mean you don't know how to install an application from your computer, right? Well, it's
Right.
like if they never had to do it, they probably don't know, right? So
Right.
don't treat them like they're a nobody or that they're stupid or whatever else. Just be like, oh, here's how you do it. Just kind of
Yeah.
give them a good idea, or at least if not being able to tell them yourself, at least send them a YouTube video and say like, hey,
Yeah.
here's a troubleshot way to do it yourself
Yeah,
too.
yeah, but it's also relatable. So I will give you a real life story, not in this place where I live, but a
Yeah.
previous 2 places ago, I tried to
Hmm.
fix basically a light switch. I couldn't get it to work, and I
Hmm.
wired it apparently wrong because every time you flip the switch, the circuit would break. After I was done with it, it would pop the circuit, and so my solution was just taping over it and saying, "Don't fix this," like, or
Yeah.
don't touch this thing. Like a year later, like a friend of mine that has electrical background came over. He's like,
Yep.
"What are you doing?" He like flipped 2 wires, and it was fine. But I don't have that requisite skill. I can hack
Right.
into
Right.
things, but that's not. And so we have to be relatable in those ways, and we have brilliant people in the world that are completely clueless about technology because that's
Yep.
not what their brilliance is. And once
Right.
we understand that, I think it makes the world a smaller place, but it makes the world a more collaborative place, which is what we need to be.
Hmm.
Ideally, as you say, we meet them on their footing. We try to help them along, assuming they're good people,
Right. Right.
and we go on with our lives. But to that point, yes, it really does come down to just simply a style of communication, and that's something that's very hard to train. In the same way that it's very hard to like change personal habits that have been
Hmm.
developed over years or decades. But it's something that I think we all need to work on.
Absolutely. Some intentionality, right? And I'll throw
Yeah.
out a book that I found to be very beneficial and very helpful. It's a classic. I think everybody, if you want to say it, everybody probably knows what it is. But it's How to Win Friends and Influence People by Dale Carnegie.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Incredible book.
So, so in that vein, if we're going down that road,
Yeah.
by Stephen Covey, The 7 Habits of Highly Effective People,
Yes.
it
Yep.
sounds like a gimmick, but
Hmm.
it was eye-opening. It
Hmm.
really, it really gives you a sense of it's not just how to speak, it's how to understand empathy better. And that's
Hmm.
something that I think we have a lot of issues with in the world right now. I mean, look at the lack of trust between two political sides. I'm not getting political here. I like to
Yeah.
say cybersecurity is agnostic to politics, but we're definitely not immune from it. Um,
Yep.
but you
Yep.
can see when you lack trust, you lack cohesion. And
Hmm.
while I preach, my first TED talk was literally called "Trust Sucks." So hear me out for a second. But my goal is to understand that we need trust in society. We should be able to trust our spouses, our loved ones, our kids to some extent. But
Hmm.
we also have to understand that we need to create a filter of distrust to the technological environment around us. That as we are
Hmm.
using all of these really cool gadgets and computers and devices and everything else, that people are there that want to steal from you, that want to break into you. That the environment is not always yours to use, like free public wireless. You don't know who you're connecting with.
Hmm.
So those are things that have to be conveyed. But I find the 7 Habits to be an actually really interesting book. I read it like, I don't know, 10, 15 years ago, and I was like, wow, this guy nailed it. He really did. And
Yeah.
it wasn't a gimmick, and
Yep.
here we are.
Absolutely. There's some titles that I come back to year and year, like every single year. And
Yeah.
How to Win Friends and Influence People is on there. Seven habits of highly effective people, and
Mhm.
Bringing Out the Best of People by Alan Lloyd McGinnis. That's those are three titles that I come back to every single year, and at least like go back and read through my notes or whatever else that was there
Yeah.
because it's so applicable to every area. It's not just business. It's not just like personal life. It's literally everything. If
Yeah.
you can learn how to help people and genuinely care for people, that's and
Yeah.
communicate right at the end of the day is really important.
Amen.
So
Totally
real
agree. Totally
real
agree.
quick, Nick, I
Mhm.
do want to find out from you, man, because I like to kind of sign off with some of these different things. One quick question: what is something that I should have asked you that I did not ask you on this episode?
What's something you should have asked me that
Yep.
something you should have asked me? Um, Maybe the state of the world in relation to Russia and Ukraine. We've been very involved in that, and that's
Hmm.
obviously impacting everything from supply chains to economies to, I think, what we're going to look like in the next 5 to 10 years politically, landscape
Hmm.
wise as well. And that's something that in cybersecurity we have to navigate. Again, being the shield for the engine of the economy on the technological side,
Hmm.
basically we are very heavily involved in this, and we've seen. Essentially lines form across the world, in terms of underground or criminal hackers of who they support, or what country they're in and who they have to support
Hmm.
by law.
Yep.
I think that's one of those things that as this unfolds and as this shapes up, it's been It's been interesting. It's been heartbreaking as well. I have a nationally syndicated radio show, if you didn't know, and I've been interviewing members of their parliament because we've had access to their government,
Oh, that's awesome.
and
Okay.
and it's been really just it's been a difficult couple of months,
Yeah.
but it's really, I think, aligning pieces on the chessboard, if you will, in ways
Mhm.
that we weren't considering, or accelerating some things as well. And so I could do an hour on that alone, so, or
Absolutely.
more.
I think
Yeah.
I think we definitely can. So at a different time, we might have to bring you back to talk about your radio show, and that's the specific piece of having a conversation with Parliament, over in that country, because I think,
Mhm.
like you said, breaking down the trust issues and things that we may have, I think it'll
Right.
create a whole lot of cohesion compared to a whole lot of divisiveness, and I think that'll be very
Yeah.
beneficial to the community as a whole.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, and obviously, in you always try to look for the silver lining, in
Hmm.
things, and the galvanization of things like NATO, and but anyway, like I said, I could go on, for hours on that, but it's I think it's probably one of the most important topics. And in our news cycles, it's now getting lost once again, because apparently Johnny Depp is getting divorced, and so that's more important. you
Mm,
know
yep.
and those
Yep.
are things that, and that's another topic I can go off on as
Hmm.
well, as it relates to that, because while I focus on cybersecurity, I mean, I have to live in this world as well.
Exactly. No, that's so true. And like I said, we could definitely bring it back. And I'm going to point to that in the show notes for everybody listening. I'm going to put the links to Nick's radio show inside of there, because I think that's going to be something very impactful to listen to. But in order to wrap this thing up for time purposes, Nick, two quick questions that I want to ask you. One, first thing, who would you recommend, now that you've been on the show? Who would you recommend that I reach out to say, hey, you definitely want to jump on Eddie's show and talk about some of the different topics as related to cybersecurity? And then the second one is, how can we find you? What's the best way to get a contact with Nick Espinosa?
Gotcha. So there are a lot of really great, cybersecurity professionals out there,
Hmm.
that are more public or more willing to speak on these kinds of things. Going after one of the Krebs would make sense. So Chris
Hmm.
Krebs, former CISA director, basically the first CISA director. Also Brian Krebs of Krebs on Security. Interestingly enough, no relation. They are not the hardest working cybersecurity family on the planet. you know but both Brian and Chris, I think, would be really interesting interviews. Obviously, they're
Awesome.
they're kind of tough to get as well, and there are some others as well. So if you want to talk about coaching and developing, a colleague of mine, his name is Chris Fallon.
Okay.
He'd be a great guy to talk to as well. He's a pretty cool guy, very knowledgeable, and all of that. And so, and how you can get a hold of me. Um,
Hmm.
well, you can Google me, but feel free. But no, you can connect to me on LinkedIn. I think it's
Okay.
/Nick Espinosa. My Twitter is at Nick AESP. I believe it's the same for Facebook. Again, you'll see my mugshot there. And basically any other platform you can think of. My show is the Deep Dive radio show, or Deep Dive Cybersecurity show. Now it's on NPR affiliates, across the nation, so
Nice.
public radio affiliates, and
Hmm.
all that kind of stuff. So feel free.
That's awesome. I love it. And it's funny because we initially met through, I think, Podmatch, and then Podmatch led me to LinkedIn, and then LinkedIn led me to your email. So that's
Right.
that's how that connection all came about. So
That's how that works,
glad.
right? Right.
Absolutely. So I'm glad, Nick, like I said, you had a chance to come onto the show, man. I really think you dropped a lot of gems, a lot of just things that we can sit and listen to and dissect, right? I strongly encourage anybody who listens to this episode, go back and re-listen to it, because I guarantee there's probably some things that I know Nick said really, really briefly that we could have spent so much more time on. But if you missed it, you definitely want to go back and re-listen to it again. So with that, I want to thank everybody for tuning in again for another episode of the Simply Secure podcast, and we look forward to seeing you again on the next one. So, what do you think? Was that helpful? There's incredible conversations just like this one all throughout this channel. The links on the screen, the videos that you'll see, is actually other videos that's very similar to some of the conversations that I had right here with this guest. So feel free to go ahead and binge watch some of these incredible conversations with other cybersecurity leaders within the space. And if you found value, feel free to go ahead and hit that subscribe button down below, as well as hit the like button, because it helps YouTube push this content and this channel to other people in the industry just like you. And obviously, those are the people that I'm trying to reach. So I appreciate you. and look forward to seeing you again on the next one. Deuces.